I don't read, but that doesn't mean I can't criticize an app that's designed exclusively for people that do. I recently stumbled across the UI for GoodReads and I noticed that it was a little bit weird. Although I do like the kind of natural aesthetic that they have, reminiscent of, holding a book in your hands, there were some pretty significant UI decisions that I think might just be ultimately quite confusing for users. Specifically, I'm talking about, as you can see here, how they kind of force a social aspect into the application and force you to divide up your library into multiple shelves: books you've read, books you're currently reading, and books you want to read. I felt like this was kind of strange because at the end of the day, as you can see from the user stories here, as a user, I really just want to track the books that I've read, review the books that I've read, read reviews from others that have also read that book, or perhaps, read reviews on books that I haven't read yet so I can know whether or not to read that one, and then discover new books that I might want to read and add them to a wish list of sorts, right? That to me seems like the core function of an app like GoodReads. The social media stuff and the linking with your friends, I guess some people like that, but I have a pretty strong suspicion that it's something that the app developers want that users don't really use that often. So I'm going to kind of throw that out in my redesign completely. But here we go. Something we're not going to throw out is their style guide, because it's quite nice, These greens and browns are kind of atypical. You don't really see this in the UI, but I feel like it would be a really interesting challenge for me to kind of take this very natural aesthetic and turn it into a nice, clean mobile experience. They're using Lato for their font, which is obviously a pretty common Google font. But nonetheless, we can work with Lato. It's a really nice, clean font. So we're going to go ahead and take a stab at redesigning the mobile UI here. I'm going to start with the navigation, of course, and get the information architecture sorted, and then try to, make it a little more user-friendly. So hang in there. It's going to be a long one, I think, but I'll see you guys in about 3 hours. I really liked the idea of having a search bar prominently displayed in the header, because it seemed like most people that open the GoodReads app, they're looking for a new book, or they want to look something up to see reviews because they're in the middle of a conversation with someone who brought up a particular book. Searching is such an important part of this particular app's flow that keeping it in the header just is a total no-brainer. Although I like the idea of having a home screen experience in most apps, I didn't agree with what was on the current home screen, just a spattering of social media content. So here we're just refactoring this to be a little more intuitive. We've got Homes, My Books, Explore, Social Media, and My Account. Wanted to play around with a more experimental design decision, and that's putting the notifications in context within the actual part of the application where that notification exists, as opposed to in the header, kind of a global namespace. That way, users will know whether or not the notifications in that domain are meaningful to them, and they can choose to consume them if they want to. It felt as though the logged in experience for this app was missing some way to kind of just check in with the user and see how their current book is going. Normally people aren't reading more than one book at once, so kind of having a book selected in the interface opens up a nice easy avenue for the application to regularly check in with you on a regular cadence. I really liked the idea of having a user set a goal for the number of books they want to read in a year, but it felt more appropriate for kind of a homepage overview type experience as opposed to the My Books part of the app. So I'm just bumping this to the front because it's going to kind of act as a dashboard for the user's experience with their books and Goodreads specifically. So it just kind of makes more sense contextually here. Similarly, having a list of highly curated book recommendations made a lot of sense to put here. This is kind of the home screen for the app, and they can add so much value to the user's experience simply because they have this wealth of knowledge that describe the kind of books that this person likes to consume. So why not recommend a couple to them that they think would be a good match right here on the home screen when they first open the app? My initial intuition here was to use secondary navigation to help the user select what kind of book list they want to look at, whether it's the ones they're currently reading, the ones they want to read, or the ones that they finished. But in the end, I decided to just kind of show them all in lists on the page because ultimately there really was no reason to gate them behind a secondary navigation. If a user can just kind of opt into looking at each individual list in context, why use why add another step to their journey, you know? Just wanted to add, once again, as those of you that have watched several Demystifying Design videos will know that I do this all the time, but whenever you're displaying a user-curated or just generally a long list of elements, it's usually a good idea to just show how many elements exist in that list as a number next to that list so users can quickly get some interesting information at a glance without having to count. I felt that the existing app was missing some way for users to explore the wealth of other books that might be interesting to them. Or at least there was an attempt to make something like that, but it seems like it's been overtaken by advertisements and featured content and stuff like that. Financial incentives gone wild. So here I'm completely refactoring that and just giving users a mechanism to explore interesting new books that might make sense to them based on their previous reading history, and also browse by category if they just want to, dive into one particular vein and read a new book about that particular topic. And of course, as a user is browsing a page like this, or really anywhere where they see a recommended book, being able to add it to a list of books they want to go back and review later is such a win for sales. It's a mutual win for sales on the app and the user themselves, right? Because they get to remember the interesting books that they might be interested in buying, and the app gets more sales because they then have a very highly curated of books that they know the user might want to purchase in the future. So whenever they go on sale, they know exactly what to place in front of the user. And here I'm finally getting to use that juicy little secondary navigation component that I built earlier to split the social feed between, or the social page rather, between your feed and your notifications. Because that's really the two main areas that users are going to want to interact with when they're in their social space. It didn't really seem to make sense to kind of have notifications take up a whole bunch of screen real estate when really users just are interested in the posts from their friends and family. It took me an absurd amount of time to get this social post card right, and I'm gonna cut through most of it here. But before I do, I want to let you know that this card in and of itself took about an hour and a half of real life time to build, and I had to heavily lean on existing design patterns that exist on places like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get it just right. So I just want to underscore that sometimes you do have to, or sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and it ultimately takes way longer if you try to do that, and it doesn't necessarily result in any positive outcome for the user. We already have established affordance with how to interact with social media cards on places like, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Why deviate from that, right? So ultimately, you're going to see a user experience that is very reminiscent of those other platforms, but just know that it took me about an hour and a half to arrive at this design conclusion. And here I'm building a really simple modal for leaving a review for an application. I feel like that should be a really simple and easy to do function on this application. And it's important that we have all the context we need to make that decision too. So I need to know what book I'm reviewing, which you can see in the modal overlay behind the pop-up. And I do want to underscore that for pop-ups on mobile, you almost always want to have them pop up from the bottom as opposed to right in the middle like you would on a desktop design, because that's where users' fingers are at, and it's very intuitive from the user that if something slides out from the bottom, that it's being displayed over the relevant content, and it's a kind of sub-experience that way. So this one's by far my longest actual raw time redesigning. I'm looking at about 4 hours of footage right now. But I really wanted to make sure that we had captured just about every main function on GoodReads here, because I really did feel like it was quite an all-encompassing application. If we didn't redesign the whole thing, we wouldn't really get that much value out of it. But here I think we've got a pretty solid solution. You know, we haven't really deviated too much from the core UI, the UX, I guess the way that the pages are laid out. But we have made some pretty significant changes to the individual experiences themselves. First of all, we've de-emphasized this social component really heavily. It's still there, right? But it's not front and center like it is in the current app. You can opt in and say, hey, yeah, this is the book I'm currently reading. I've got some curated recommendations, which are based on other books that I want to read. This would be valuable to me as a user. And then some, snippets from the feed. And then when we go to my books, I have, of course, featured right at the top, this is the book that I'm currently reading, and you can rate it or remove it. If you want to rate it, you get a little modal that pops up, really easy. And I can also see all these other lists, books that I want to read and books that I've finished, and I could, in theory, click to view all to see a more detailed breakdown of those individual books. When I'm exploring, I'm again seeing recommendations for me, and then maybe also books that are trending in categories that I'm generally subscribed to, because if most people like them, statistically speaking, I'll probably like them as well. But if everything else fails, I can just browse by category. Finally, we've got our social network here, which is a very primitive, I guess, version of a social network where users can interact with their friends and participate in somewhat of a digital book club, which I think makes a lot of sense for an app like this. But here we have the before, where everything seems to be designed with the app developers in mind, and engagement metrics in mind. Lots of really confusing UI and bad use of white space. And then here we have the new UI, where everything's kind of just like positioned in a manner that you would expect it to be. It's very user first, and all of the content is placed in a manner that is easy to consume, is intuitive, and there's no crazy spacing issues going on throughout the UX. So let me know what you think. Thanks for making it through this slog of an episode. I really hope that you found it meaningful, valuable in some way, and that you took some little nugget of design insight out of it. But if you have any other design that you'd like me to tear down in another video, please do pop a comment down below, and we'll take a look at it in the next episode. But until then, have a lovely weekend. I'll see you next week, guys.